Imagine being given a challenge that sounds impossible. How do you make an execution less cruel? That was the question facing Britain during the Victorian era. Public hangings had become one of the most controversial spectacles in the country. Thousands would gather to watch. Some treated them like entertainment. Others were horrified by what they witnessed. The problem wasn't that people were being executed. That was accepted by much of society at the time. The problem was the way many of them died. Executions were often slow, unpredictable, and deeply disturbing to watch. As Britain entered an age of railways, factories, and scientific discovery, something strange happened. The same society that was revolutionizing engineering and medicine began asking whether science could also improve the mechanics of death. The result was one of the most unusual chapters in British history, the transformation of hanging from a crude punishment into a carefully calculated science, when hanging was more guesswork than science. For centuries, Britain's standard method of execution relied on what historians now call the short drop. The process was brutally simple. A prisoner stood on a platform, the trapdoor opened, the rope tightened. The problem was that the drop was usually too short to break the neck. Instead, death often came through strangulation. The condemned could remain conscious for some time, struggling for breath as crowds watched. Executions could last several agonizing minutes. There were no formulas, no standardized measurements, no scientific guidelines. Every execution depended largely on the experience of the hangman, the quality of the equipment, and a considerable amount of luck. Sometimes the process was quicker, sometimes it was not. For a society increasingly obsessed with progress, efficiency, and scientific thinking, this unpredictability became difficult to justify. If engineers could build bridges with mathematical precision, why couldn't the justice system apply the same principles to executions? The scientist who calculated death. In 1866, an Irish scientist named Samuel Haughton attempted to answer that question. Haughton wasn't a professional executioner. He was a professor, physician, mathematician, and one of the leading scientific minds of his day. While most people saw hanging as a legal or moral issue, Haughton viewed it as a mechanical problem. His goal wasn't to make executions more severe. It was the opposite. He wanted to eliminate the prolonged suffering caused by strangulation. So he began calculating. Using physics, mathematics, and medical knowledge, Haughton developed a formula designed to determine exactly how far a prisoner should fall based on their body weight. Too short a drop, and the prisoner might slowly suffocate. Too long a drop, and the injuries could become catastrophic. The objective was to find a precise middle ground that would cause immediate unconsciousness and rapid death. For perhaps the first time in history, an execution method was being designed using scientific principles rather than tradition. The gallows had become an engineering project. The birth of the long drop. Haughton's work eventually led to what became known as the long drop method. Unlike earlier executions, the long drop was carefully calculated to generate enough force to break the upper neck instantly when the rope reached the end of its fall. The theory was straightforward. A heavier prisoner required a shorter drop because their body mass generated more force. A lighter prisoner required a longer drop to achieve the same result. Every measurement mattered. Weight, rope length, drop distance. The goal was consistency. Victorian authorities believed they had finally found a way to replace uncertainty with science. But the real story becomes even more fascinating when you understand what was happening inside the body. The injury, the system was designed to create. The long drop wasn't intended to kill through strangulation. It was designed to cause a specific injury. Today, this injury is commonly known as a hangman's fracture. It occurs high in the neck, involving the second cervical vertebra, often referred to as the axis. When the body dropped and the rope snapped tight, the head was forced backward with tremendous force. The resulting fracture disrupted the nervous system almost instantly. Victorian reformers considered this a major improvement over earlier methods because unconsciousness occurred far more rapidly than in traditional hangings. In other words, the objective had shifted. The old system relied on slowly depriving the body of oxygen. The new system relied on a precisely engineered injury. It was a remarkable example of science being applied to one of society's oldest forms of punishment. But even the most carefully designed systems can fail. The day the gallows refused to work. In 1885, a case emerged that shocked Britain. A man named John Henry George Lee was sentenced to death for murder and brought to the gallows at Exeter Prison. Everything appeared normal. Lee was prepared for execution. The executioner pulled the lever. Nothing happened. The trapdoor failed to open. Officials inspected the mechanism and tried again. Once again, nothing happened. The equipment was tested with weights and appeared to function perfectly. Lee was brought back. A third attempt was made. The trapdoor failed again. At that point, the execution was halted. The authorities faced an extraordinary situation. The law had ordered an execution, but the machinery designed to carry it out simply refused to cooperate. News of the incident spread rapidly. Some believed it was mechanical failure. Others believed it was divine intervention. The public became fascinated by the case, and Lee eventually became known as the man they could not hang. His death sentence was later commuted. The event exposed a reality that no amount of mathematics could eliminate. Even scientific systems depend on machines, and machines can break. When science started raising bigger questions. The Victorian reformers believed they were solving a problem, and in some ways they were. Executions became more standardized. The prolonged suffering associated with many earlier hangings was reduced. Procedures became increasingly controlled and regulated. Yet an unexpected question emerged. If society was investing so much effort into making executions more humane, what did that say about the punishment itself? The closer Britain moved toward clinical efficiency, the more people began questioning the practice altogether. What started as an attempt to improve capital punishment eventually contributed to a broader debate about whether capital punishment should exist at all. The conversation had shifted. The question was no longer, how should we execute people? It was becoming, should we be doing this at all? The strange legacy of the long drop. The story of British hanging isn't really a story about ropes, gallows, or executioners. It's a story about a society trying to solve a moral problem with technology. Victorian Britain believed science could make even death more efficient, more predictable, and perhaps more humane. For a time it succeeded, but the more precisely the system was engineered, the more uncomfortable people became with the reality behind it. The result is one of history's great ironies. The scientific effort to perfect execution helped spark the conversations that would eventually lead many people to reject it entirely. In trying to make death more humane, Britain ended up asking whether a humane execution could ever truly exist.